Since it's a small group, I think we can probably manage like 20-second introductions each.
Hey, sorry for being late. Just got out of a meeting. My name is Mike Lovis. I'm the Director of Design and Innovation at a innovation program called Cancer Digital Intelligence in a cancer center called Princess Margaret in Toronto, Canada. I've been in healthcare for many years in different roles, biomedical engineering, design, and now kind of bridging those two, plus data, plus just more like a operational innovation team. So we focus exclusively on cancer, mostly for our hospital, and do lots of kind of patient-facing stuff, but also clinical-facing stuff and AI data. It's a pretty broad team. Yeah, I think that's it.
Hello, my name is Elise Crockett. I am currently a population health consultant in Indiana. My company's called Suburban Health Organization. We're actually owned by 13 different small Indiana-based hospitals that want to maintain their independence and not be purchased by bigger like tertiary hospitals. My background is in health IT. I've been in health IT space for about I guess 10 years now. I used to work at Cerner, which was it's now called Oracle Cerner, which is a electronic medical record company. The past year or so, I've transitioned into, or tried to make that transition into UX. And I've completed a boot camp, and like many other boot camp graduates, trying to make that transition has been a fun ride right now. And yeah, thank you for letting me join today. Nice to meet you guys.
Hi everyone, I'm Komal and I currently work as a designer and a researcher in the automotive field. I am interested in healthcare because initially I have done a game design project with the neuroscience department, which was similar to a game called Sea Hero Quest, which essentially collects data from all the users about how they are navigating, and that makes it easier to crowdsource data and then get an idea about what the baseline would be for decline in navigational ability over different age groups. And that was helpful in the research for dementia and Alzheimer's. So I'm interested in working on more projects like that and looking to work more in the healthcare field.
Yeah, so hi everyone, I am Ashish Kumar. I work as a design lead in Scrut Automation. So let me tell you more about what Scrut Automation do. So Scrut Automation is actually a platform by which like you can do all your compliances like ISO, GDPR and all those. But prior joining to Scrut Automation, I do have worked in the healthcare industry. So I have an experience of about like 1 year in the healthcare industry. And so we worked on mostly the DHP, like the digital healthcare products, in which like we made the tools which can be used by healthcare industries to get more about like how we can do very critical operations and all those things. So I'm very much into that part when I was working with the healthcare industries, but these days like I'm not working in that. But yeah, I would love to learn more, because like in the previous month also, like I visited one of the healthcare organization in which like I collaborated with other designers out there. So yeah, I would love to learn more in this industry as well.
And I'm Alex. I'm the director of UX at Better Way Blood Testing in Austin, Texas. And I started in healthcare about 13 years ago. I'd been doing UX design prior to that for a few years. And then I kind of got into healthcare accidentally just because I wanted to work with this particular team, happened to be in healthcare. And I was at a company called the Advisory Board. And I was there for maybe 6 or 7 years, and I really loved working there. Then we were acquired by Optum, which is a huge company in the US, part of United Health Group. Optum's like 350,000 employees, and our design team was like 150 designers. So went from, you know, a much smaller team to this huge organization, huge team. Then that was not for me. So then I went to a small startup of about 15 people called Navio, and we were working on tools to support cancer patients and for cancer providers. Did that for a couple of years, weren't quite getting the traction that we wanted. And so I recently came to Better Way back in February. And so we do blood testing, like I said, sorry, Angela, was it? Did I get it right? Okay. Mentioned Theranos earlier. So what we do is, you know, we take only about a pea-sized amount of blood. We don't take a drop of blood. We don't make the crazy claims that Theranos made, but we take a small amount of blood from a finger prick, and you can do it at a pharmacy. So that's kind of our unique value proposition. And we're not in the market yet. We have our science is ready, but we're working on the digital kind of product so people can choose their blood tests and book appointments and things like that. And then I also have a little project that I'm working on called Design with Care, which is just meant to, it's a community to support designers working in healthcare. So hopefully folks like the people on this call.
Thank you all for those intros. Lamia, are you able to do an intro too? Okay, I don't think we can hear you. So that either something's wrong with the mic or, but feel free whenever you pop back in here to, we can pause for an intro. Well, cool. This is a very interesting session for design rounds, because usually we are heavily design and then like digital health tech with like 1 or 2 spotlight clinicians. Today it feels a little bit more like we're heavily clinical with obviously designers in the space, but in some like physical form of healthcare, which is really cool because I think we can learn a lot from these areas. Okay, well, I'm happy to start off with the first question, but like I mentioned, please chime in at any time. Now that we all have intros, we kind of understand like each other's backgrounds and where we're spiking. The first question, and I'm very curious to hear from everyone's like varied background, is like there's so much data floating around now, right? There's data that, especially for someone working at a company that's purely based on accessing data in a digital way. What are the ways that we can use data and incorporate data into our products, into our digital applications, into our services in ways that personalize care and are beneficial, but don't feel quote unquote creepy to the end users? I think we are all aware of all the spam calls and spam emails and like phishing attacks. So, you know, people are very wary of getting of how their data is used. Even if the end usage is something that might be beneficial, I think people are very wary about giving their data in the first place. So like how have you guys seen, or how have you guys been thinking about ways in which gathering this data is beneficial? And how maybe like from a design, broadly speaking design, not just like UX and UI, but how do we design services and health tech applications that that ensure trust and security?
So I'll kind of, oh, go ahead if you want to go first.
And that's why we do the raised hand thing.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I guess I'll go first. So I don't know if I'm necessarily going to answer your question from how do we design, right? Because I'm a newbie designer, but I will definitely speak kind of on how, in my current position, how we use data and my thoughts on it. So I myself am not a clinician, but I support clinicians, specifically tied to like care coordination or disease management. And what we've struggled with is that there is tons of data. And we look at kind of the biggest tool that can get us the most information. But what happens is they get a long list of people that they need to kind of either reach out to their care coordinator, and it gets overwhelming. And so using tools that help kind of stratify that data of like, this is key groups of people that you need to focus on has been helpful. The other thing that we've struggled is just enough staff. And I mean, I don't think it's new, but I mean, healthcare is definitely experiencing that, not having enough staff. So the more data you throw at them doesn't necessarily, when you try and approach them and say, hey, we have this new tool, it's going to give you all this information, all this data, they're like, I don't even have time with the information I already have. So any way that we can design tools that help them, and remember that they're not the data experts, right? Like they're not necessarily going to want to create all these different reports. It should be easy at their fingertips when they see a patient. Again, I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but this is kind of what I hear on a daily basis. The other piece I wanted to add, which is interesting that Alex brought up Optum, but the payer part is what causes a lot of that need to gather certain data. In order to prove that your patient is compliant from an A1C, you have to make sure that it's dropped on a claim. And then that requires the provider or the nursing staff to have to document that. So it's another kind of checkbox that they have to fill. So I think that's another kind of big barrier in healthcare, is that kind of those payer requirements.
So one of the things as an end user is always that, how's my data going to be used? Or even if not used, even if my data is going to be anonymous, how is my data going to be helpful for someone else? So being transparent at every stage, hey, so this is why we are collecting your data, and this is how it's going to be helpful for you. This is how it's going to be helpful for others. For example, in C Hero Quest, they tell you in the beginning itself that, hey, we are collecting your data to help create a baseline. It's going to help us in further research. After that, when we have data, you've got the heat maps of how everyone's been navigating, but the heat maps are anonymous right now. You don't have any data related to it. So at 2 points of time, they give you 2 sets of questions, which are more along the lines of identifying questions that, okay, how old are you? Where do you live? What's your dominant hand? Now, all of these questions, again, they're very clear that, first of all, it's your option. Do you actually give this data? Don't give this data? Second of all, it is, if you do give your data, this is how it's going to be helpful. So I guess at every stage, being transparent, being clear about how it's helpful, why it's being asked for, and then in the end, letting them know what's happening with your data. Where is it at? Is something happening with it? Is it just lost in the ether? Because that's another fear. I've given my data, but is my data even useful for someone or not?
That's interesting on the trigger for like, how was it used? It's like, would they benefit or be nervous about like, oh, we pulled it again and used it in this way? That's an interesting thing to think about. One thing I wanted to ask a follow-up on for what Elise was saying is like, you're totally right in that too much data is also inundating, right? It's like, okay, here's like 6 spreadsheets for you to look at, because look at this trove of data that's really helpful. And then so the reasonable next logical thing is take all that data and as the tech organization, help them like segment it or crunch it or summarize it or whatever way to distill it down to something that's useful. But I wonder, would there be like, I also used to work on the EMR at Oscar, where like you're taking all this data, you're bringing it down to like, here's a high level summary of the patient, or like, here's a summary of like maybe your SOAP note or something like that. But I wonder if would we run into any trust issues? Like the grass is always greener on both sides, but also the grass is like totally brown on both sides. Like, is there going to be trust issues on like, well, you summarize this, but now I'm not sure if you summarized it correctly, so I want to see the source data, and you get caught in this like rock and hard place kind of a situation.
Yeah, a couple things that I heard that kind of ringing some bells for me. So one of the things that we did at Navio was we tried to visualize a health history for patients. So I think when you have all this data and all these spreadsheets, there's like at least two use cases. There's one of just someone wants to know about a specific aspect of their health history and they're searching for something, and their, spreadsheets and databases are great for that. But just looking at that to kind of get your health history, whether it's for you or you're sharing it with a family member or a friend or with a provider, that's a much more difficult thing, I think, to go through. And when we were experimenting with this, we would interview patients, and then we would manually create these health histories, and we were exploring whether we should try to automate this in some way. And then we would share them back with them, and people were really, really moved by it. And they would see things in their health history that they had forgotten about, or they didn't realize, or they'd say, my God, I can't believe I was having headaches 4 years ago, and I thought I've just been sick for a year. And if I look at this, it goes back this far. And we also pulled out quotes that they had said, and we put them on their timeline in different places. And reading their own words back to themselves was another thing. And that's not something that typically is going to come through in health data, right? Is like how they were feeling or what they said at various points. So that was pretty impactful. What was kind of surprising to me, though, is that we asked them to share it with their physicians, and their physicians didn't really care. They're just like, that's nice. Just what's happened since the last time you were here. That's what they wanted to know every time. What's new since the last visit? And these are cancer patients, so these are people that are going in frequently and have a relationship with their doctor. I think there might be more utility in going to a new doctor, although the feedback that we heard wasn't that great. Like they want to just look at the notes. I think, Angela, to your point, like, can they trust this? And that maybe they want to look at it, maybe it's interesting, but they're gonna want to go to the physician notes in the ER, the EHR, and look at that directly. But if you're interested in that kind of thing, there's a company called Pictal Health. We actually looked at what they were doing and took some inspiration for that. But very similar. They do really, really cool stuff with that.
You said it was called Pictal Health? Pictal, okay. I just wanted to kind of piggyback off of what Angela said, and I think it's a great point about a lot of times, again, I'm coming at it from a perspective of we're looking at financial performance, utilization, quality. And so we have to report that to the providers. And we definitely get the question of, hey, is this data accurate? You're saying that this is where I'm scoring at. And by then not necessarily having that transparency of where we're getting that data from causes the conversations to not really go very far. And I think that applies to, with like you said, if you're summarizing the health data, the providers are going to wonder if there's something going into the calculations or pulling that data together, and we're pulling out key points. So I think that was a great point. And then also regarding as a consumer or as a patient, where my data is being used at, I think is a very kind of sensitive thing. I also think about, when you report data, is it going to be used against you? So the whole thing of like, if I have, let's say, a chronic disease and it's on the payers have that access to that data, but at what point, there's supposed to be protections in place to not, your employer not necessarily to know all your information, but there's always that concern of like, even if I'm putting in my data, what are you doing with it? And is there any way that it could impact me negatively? And again, I'm not coming with any solutions, but I'm just voicing kind of this is what I'm surrounded with on a daily basis, because I also work kind of within like HIPAA compliance. And so it's a daily struggle.
I had a few points. I think that it's a logical place to start by saying, like, if you're going to provide providers with data or AI generated decision support or that kind of thing, I think it's an intuitive place to start with, like, having transparency in terms of letting them see how that how that data has been generated. I think though that, although that makes sense, I think if you think through the workflow of a busy clinician, if they're going to click a button and then see this complex, like multifactorial, like it's going to be incredibly complex for them to dig into, and they probably won't. So I know transparency is important, but I think it's really nuanced to like what that actually means. And I think another thing is like just human behavior. I think there's a lot of stuff that we deal with as humans, as people in modern culture, that we don't have full transparency behind, but somehow we've become accustomed to it, or we've become trusting of these systems, these AI recommendations. And so I think there's something around time. There's like trust. Do other people use it? There's like a bunch of other kind of facets of building trust beyond just transparency. And I think and as an example, I think providers notoriously were like anti patient generated data, whether symptom like PROS, symptom reported or patient reported symptoms, or biometric data that was like using home devices. But I think more and more, at least in my experience, providers are becoming more accustomed to seeing patient reported data and more trusting of it. And I don't know exactly what's gone into that. Maybe it's just time. It's like, oh yes, people can step on a scale and I generally, can accept it. Maybe they don't accept it as the same thing as if a nurse in their clinic generated that data, but it still has value. So I don't have a kind of a definitive answer on that, but I think there's a lot of nuance behind it. And I think time is a big factor. I forget where this fits into the conversation, but I know that somebody was talking about trusting the data, being in-house at a hospital, using patient data for in-house development and in-house innovation seems like a trustworthy kind of sandbox. I feel like once you kind of take that out or bring that into the private market, I feel like that's where things get hairy, and where there's like kind of inherent trust. You're part of the care team, even though like we're an innovation team, we're seen as part of the care team. So that there's that inherent trust that we kind of leverage. I'm
kind of curious, before I go through the points that I wanted to make, where, like, how or where have you seen like providers being more trusting of patient reported data elements? Because on the one hand, it's like, okay, there's the just the fact that they can trust it more, they like can take it into more account. But then there's the other, which is like, as a objective piece of evidence in a SOAP note, can it actually qualify or can it not qualify? So like, how do those two pieces fit in? Or is it just used as like context?
I mean, I guess you're asking me. I think the biometrics, I think if you show like trends over time, that's like the provider is like, okay, this makes sense. Yes, these are like reasonable values, and then they drop off. It's like there's kind of trust in the patient generating that data over time, and then there's a difference. So I feel like that's one aspect of it. I think generally just the idea of like wearables or biometrics at home has been a concept that's people are just getting used to as humans. So I think that's another element to it. But I do think there is always like an asterisk with patient generated data. And some providers, for PROS, for instance, some providers still don't kind of accept that. They want to ask the question themselves, and then like, because the patient may not fully understand what they're asking, or they may be trying to protect the physician or trying not to burden people or whatever the case may be. And so some providers definitely don't trust that form of data. I can't really comment on soap notes though. Out of my wheelhouse.
Yeah. Oh, right. I still had one more other point. Where does this fit in? Oh, I think again, Mike, it was something you were saying about providing other ways to represent trust in the system without being like fully transparent, or not that you should be hiding, but that's not the only lever for the record. But what it kind of reminded me of is like, as designers, when you think about making like a novice version of a tool and the expert level version of the tool, it's almost like, what are the level steps into security and trust? So it's like, maybe when you get into clinical decision support, that's a whole other world. But for example, you're like summarizing a note, or maybe you're providing a suggestion, or you're like auto confirming a condition based on like data sources that you have already. Like there's the face value of like, okay, we've confirmed this data source. And then there's like showing the ability to dig in to understand where that data source comes from. I wonder if like just showing that is enough of evidence and proof, where maybe half the providers actually go in and read the source data, half of them don't, but just knowing that it's there is a comfort element.
So this is all making me think about trust that patients that people have in sharing their data. And I'm curious from the group or from anyone, if you feel like you're seeing a trend one way or the other in terms of how trusting patients are in sharing their data. And there's two things that come to mind. One is like, for a while I thought, well, trust is, maybe it's not trust that's going to go up, but fears seems to be going down, in that people are so willing, especially as you go younger and younger in the generations, they're so willing to share their health experiences in social media. And you have GoFundMe's where they're talking about everything, and like that's like the more that they share, the better, and people sharing things on Facebook, etc. While at the same time, I think there's more awareness about how your data is being sold. And so I'm not sure which way it's going in terms of how trusting people are with giving their health information to maybe news sources, but I would be curious if anyone has experienced that one way or the other more. And I certainly know there are people out there that absolutely don't trust any aspect of medicine. I've seen those responses in surveys where it's like, we're asking them questions about would they use this service, and it's like, I wouldn't use any medical service because doctors just want my money and that's it. So there's a certain segment of the population that's all the answer is ever going to be. But yeah, curious about trends with sharing data.
I was gonna say I had my hand raised for something else. I don't really have tons of insight on that. I will add though, regarding like personally, definitely for convenience, there's been times where I've been, this is a big business, or it's my health system. I'll share my data and maybe take the risk. I also thought it was great when Mike explained about the health system trust that patients have versus, I don't know, let's say like the Amazon or Google Health. It's a different type of trust that I would have with my current health system that I go to. And then I did have something about the wearable, but I can wait until you guys answer Alex's question.
Unmute. So we ran at Flexpa, so we build like a pretty sophisticated patient panel in order to stress test and user test our product. Because at the end of the day, Flexpa integrates with ideally every payer in the United States. There's a lot on the long tail, but there's also a lot in payers that cover a population of greater than like 100,000 lives. So what we do is we build out this patient panel to essentially have like live members from each of these pairs in order to go through our system, connect, make sure that all these integrations are working properly. There's a lot to go into all the troubleshooting that is required when we inevitably find that a lot of these endpoints are not working properly. But that's why this patient panel is really helpful. And we use DScout, if you guys are familiar with that platform. We use DScout to execute these surveys and to source a lot of these members. Obviously, there's a lot of consents that a user needs to go through. So as part of our screener questions, we take the opportunity to also ask, how comfortable are you with sharing your data with a digital health application? And then based on how they answer that question, we also ask a bunch of follow-ups. Just some interesting stats from that, because two things to note, two like qualifiers are Flexpa was fairly new. Most consumers don't know it. So our customers are at the end of the day like digital health applications or payers or organizations. So end consumers interact with it in that they use it to log in, but they might not have a lot of brand recognition of Flexpa. So it feels like a new digital health application to them. And the other is they are coming through DScout. So they are incentivized in a way that an organic user would not be. So those are two qualifications. But when we ask this question, how do you feel about sharing your medical data with third-party digital health applications? 30%, let's see, let me go from very top to very bottom. So we've seen 8.7% are very uncomfortable. 25% are very comfortable. And 23% are neither comfortable nor uncomfortable, with a bit of it on the other two, sorry, are uncomfortable and comfortable. So you got a Likert scale of 1 through 5.
Just to clarify, 25% saying they're very comfortable. Does it qualify? Like, are they saying you guys take my data and do whatever you want with it? Or is it
so
like
we don't,
they'll be remunerated or they'll consent to where exactly it goes, or is it kind of open?
It's totally open. So the question is written like this. So there's no additional qualifiers, no terms and conditions, no privacy policies. This is the question as it stands. And sorry for going through that Likert scale so confusingly. Google Spreadsheets does not order it in the way you'd think they would order it.
Right.
But what I got out of this was like significantly more people were more comfortable than I thought, actually. So let's see, if I add up very comfortable, that's 24.6 plus comfortable is 32. That is 56.6%. And the middle, which is neither comfortable nor uncomfortable, was 23%. And this, the N is 722 responses. So that was fairly interesting. And then, go ahead, Mike.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was gonna, similar to Elisa, I feel like the age that these are people who've like actively volunteered to get paid to do an online survey or something. Probably young, probably tech savvy. They're doing it already. They're kind of divulging information about themselves. So that makes sense. I feel like once it gets to the end of the road where it's like, okay, we're going to sell your data to pharma XYZ and you'll get nothing back for it. Check the box, like say yes, agree. I imagine that you won't get 56% or whatever. So I think it's all dependent on like who it is, obviously, and where it's going and what the terms are.
Totally.
Yeah.
So that question is at the very beginning of the screener, where they don't know anything about Flexpa, don't know anything about the task that we're going to have them do, and then we explain the task, which is you're going to have to log into your health insurance portal, password, whatever isn't saved, but it's through this application called Flexpa. And then we ask the question again, just to see what drop-off might look like. It's a screener anyways, right? So they get screened out if they say no, because we wouldn't have them do the task. So at that point, after they learn about Flexpa and learn about what we want them to do and what the application requires, we get 20% drop-off. So 20% of people end up saying, actually, I'm not comfortable with this. But 80% still go through with it. it is true, obviously they are financially incentivized to do it if they want, but the financial incentive isn't, it's not like we're giving you $5,000, give us your data, right? But I do find, and then we ask like a qualitative question at the end as well, which is like, can you explain your answer? A lot of them end up coming out as like, yeah, I'm okay with it as long as it provides me benefit at the end. So that's very interesting. When we talk to our customers, we say like, explaining your value proposition is extremely important in getting through this product. Like, because a lot of our customers ask us about like, what are drop-off rates, you know, what is abandonment, what is whatever. And while we can give them broad answers, a lot of it depends on like, well, do your users find value in being able to do this? Because otherwise they're just handing over their data for no perceived value. And some people do say like, oh, I'm happy to give my data for research.
Yeah.
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 So kind of a thought which came from Alex's question, continuing on what Elise said. What I've seen is most people are happy to share data with their current healthcare provider as long as they've been using them for a while. Like if they are going to a defense hospital, they don't mind if their data gets sent to another defense hospital for like cross-checking, or it is essentially just helping augment all the data which is there. But this also might be a very region-specific problem. A doctor covers not just a person who has studied medicine and is practicing medicine in the sense that they studied clinically, but it's also your alternate forms of medicine, like natural medicine. Even they have their own set of exams and they do get called as doctors. So if you have a hospital where you have a mixture of all kinds of doctors, then that again becomes a reason where some people are hesitant to share their data, because they would want only what they consider as professional doctors who look at their data and then come back with suggestions based on that. And that sort of translates into applications as well, because you don't know who's at the end of each application. You're just saying doctor, first name, last name, and which area they specialize in.
That's true. That's very interesting. It reminds me, this is a little bit of a tangent, but it reminds me of an experience I had where I got a call. I usually spam filter anything that's not in my contact list, but I got a call and for some reason I was like, I'll answer this one. And it was like, oh, we're calling from your bank. I mean, was it a bank? It was something like, it was compelling at the beginning. I was like, we're calling from your bank. There's like, this is happening, or like, we're changing these policies, whatever. Like, we need to verify some of your information. And I think what it was like, the reason why I answered was I had prompted my bank about something in the first place and then got this call. And they're like, we just need to verify that you are who you are. So we need your social and your birthday. And I'm here thinking like, wait, I got a call from you. Like, you verify that you're actually from the bank and that you work there and that you're taking my information for the actual purposes that I requested it to be used, and not, who knows, right? I was like, how do I get you to verify who you are instead of me verifying, I mean, in addition to me verifying who I am.
I know, I had the exact same experience, and in the end, I don't know if yours was legit or not, but my call was legit, but they couldn't do it. I was like, is this a spam call? And they're like, sorry, no, of course it's not a spam call. Can you please, give like all of this detail? And I'm like, I don't even know who is calling right now. Why would I do that? Like, but anyway.
Well, how did you, mine was legit too, but what did you end up doing?
I ended up hanging up, but then I forget, I went into the bank in person, and then they were like, oh yeah, it looks like we tried to contact you, but blah, blah, blah. So yeah, it is a weird thing, because if they divulge all the information, if you're not the person that they think they're getting, then they've just disclosed a bunch of privacy. So it's like, I don't know, a catch-22.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, with 8 minutes left, that was a nice, like, natural wrap to that conversation. Super fascinating. Thank you all for sharing. At previous design rounds, we kind of fell into this nice little pattern of having some sort of like a open-ended sort of like food for thought question. And the one that I have written down for today was prompted by a conversation I was having actually just earlier today, which was like, how can we take inspiration from industries that are completely different from ours? I think it's easy to take inspiration from industries that are close to ours, like, for example, everyone in this group. But like, Komal, you came from the automotive industry. Two that I have, and I'd love to hear if anyone has like immediate thoughts, is one is how might we be able to take inspiration from like a Pixar or a Disney? So engaging content, animations, whatever else you think of when you think of Pixar and Disney. And the other is, how can we take inspiration from the hospitality industry? So people who run hotels or restaurants, concierge services. What are pieces of either of those industries that we could incorporate? That either it's because it's delightful and adds to the experience, or it could be like a new way to enhance like your core experience.
So I'll just add, it's kind of interesting that you brought up like the Pixar and Disney. Within the hospital setting, they actually have had kind of the Disney, I don't know what they call it, but it's like a whole thing where they talk to the hospital staff to be able to get them to make the experience, the patient journey in a hospital, what you say, more delightful. And part of being a hospital, there is a requirement that patient satisfaction scores are highly important. And so I do think healthcare tries to do that, but there's so many other things going on that you're just trying to get the imaging done, or you're just trying to see the visit, that I think it gets kind of hard within the hospital setting. But I definitely agree with it. Even as a patient, something that's a more enjoyable, I dread going to the doctor or the hospital, so anything that could make it more enjoyable. I definitely also look at the kind of the technology that they're using, and if it's like an enjoyable tool to use, I'm more likely to use that kind of data tool. But I think mentioning Pixar and Disney and all that is definitely something that healthcare has tried. It's just healthcare in general is just a slow thing to move.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, I agree with all of that. I feel like this isn't necessarily a different inspiration from a different industry, but I find service design as a practice which has been used often in other service industries like hospitality, is a great kind of organizing principle or framework to use in healthcare. And similar to what you just said, I think, I don't know. So I work in cancer care. So the idea of like injecting delight or like amazing experiences just doesn't totally fit right, and especially in a public hospital. And so I really resonate more with like good services and Lou Downs stuff around good service. I forget what her school is called, School of Good Services or something like that, where it's like they're really trying to make solid, like really intuitive UX that isn't necessarily delightful and wow, but it's just really solid. And so that's what I aim for. Yeah, I find their stuff is really like hyper practical, not very academic, but very easy to use.
Alex, you're muted.
You put a question in my head, which is that Disney must have some kind of on-site health center for people that have heat stroke or whatever. So I'm curious, like, what that looks like, and if there's any of the Disney experience in that. Obviously not like people dressed as Mickey Mouse, but you know, they put so much thought into everything that they do, whether it's related to cleaning up the trash or, you know, how lines are managed and all that. Surely there must be something there, and I wonder if there's anything online about that.
Oh my gosh, Alex, time for you to go to Disneyland and go faint, and then let us know.
And the other thing is there's something called the Design Institute for Health here in Austin. It's part of of UT, and they collaborate with like the design center and the medical center. They have a graduate program, but they also do some really cool things. It's a training hospital there, and so they put a lot of these design design thinking principles into place. They do things and they experiment with things like early on they were handing out little pagers or whatever in the lobby or in the waiting room. Instead of sitting down and waiting to be called, you could wander around into the nice beautiful atrium until you get buzzed. There was no waiting room. You just check in, you get your thing, and you can go wherever you want. Things like widening the hallways just to give it a more spacious feel. Painting the hallways in different sort of environmental motifs. They would do things like in the waiting or in the exam room itself, instead of having a physician chair and then having where you sit, where you're kind of below and there's this power dynamic working, they would make the seating at equal heights. They would put locks on the inside of the exam room so that you can lock the door, so that while you're changing or whatever, no one's going to walk in. You don't have that knock knock, are you ready? Little things like that, just really cool. Thinking about kind of that service design, not delight, but like a great experience, like Mike was saying.
So when you said taking inspiration from automotive, two things kind of jumped out to me. One of them was that the infotainment systems in all the newer vehicles, if you look at it, they are a lot bigger and they are a lot more complex. So all of the things which used to be physical buttons once upon a time now have become digital. And there's been a lot of research done into how everything's over there and how to make sure that someone can just look at it and pick it up without a lot of prior knowledge. So maybe we can leverage that research and that understanding into healthcare as well. The second thing is that when you are taking your car for maintenance, now what a lot of places are doing is you have two types of maintenance. One is where you schedule a service, it's a long drawn out process. You are putting it for XYZ time, maybe that day, maybe a later day, whenever it is, but you're not going to have your car for quite a while. The other is they're coming up with the express check-in, where within a couple of hours, you're only coming in for a short service, or there is something that just urgently needs to be looked at. You go there with your car and you're out of there in like 2 hours. So maybe we can look at giving people the option of, hey, do you want to really get something quick and easy where you just want to get an opinion, just do a quick follow-up? Or do you have the time to sit down, spend the time over there, talk to the patients, get all the follow-ups done? That doesn't mean that they're missing out on services. It's that they can prioritize what sort of a service they want at that time.
That's cool. That's a really great analogy in a world that you wouldn't compare to healthcare normally. The last thing I'll wrap with is I really appreciated that perspective, Mike, and I really agree with the thought of like, maybe it's not about making it delightful, so to speak, because like how many people are coming to the healthcare system just to be like, hey, what's going on? How are things doing? But it's like the bar is so low. Like, how do we make things just like a pleasant experience? Like, you don't absolutely hate going to the doctors. Like, even the little things like putting the lock on the inside of the door, that small anxiety and taking that away. I really love that framing and some of those smaller ideas, and that all fits into service design, right? It's not about like, okay, in this specific application that we build, you have a great time, but everything outside of it is dumpster fire. Well, thank you guys so much for joining. Really appreciated this conversation. It was so much fun brainstorming with you all. Hope to see you in a future one, and look out for this recording on YouTube. Like and subscribe. See you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Oh.